Lady Laguna starting to come out after them now. Lady Laguna moved up, struck the front. The fillies and mares is all over. Lady Laguna wins it well. King of Sparta moved up at the 100 metres mark. Rose Quartz, baller for place chances. King of Sparta, king of the Gold Coast. A bounding closing out wider. Sovereign Fund, a bounding over the top. A bounding wins the 3-year-old fillies.
Why you mad? Fix your face. Ain't my fault they all be jacking. Keep up.
It's Storm Boy in front, 100 metres left to run. Highness can't bring back the margin. Then Spy Wire, but it's all Storm Boy, and Storm Boy is too good for them in the 2-year-old. Storm Boy by 3.
And now on PG Podcast Network, it's time for the year-round Carnival with Vince Accardi and your host, Racetrack Ralphy.
G'day, thanks for getting our preview edition of Magic Millions Day at the Gold Coast tomorrow. Wowee, what type of drama have we had, Vince Accardi from Daily Sectionals? Where's the meeting going to be? It was moved last week. I'm pretty confident, Vince, that even though there's rain predicted, I reckon it could be a monsoon, because with all that money there from the yearling sales, they're not moving this meeting.
Well, that's what you'd like to think. Well, first of all, Happy New Year,
Happy
Ralphie.
New Year to you and our fantastic customers.
Yeah, and looking forward to the year ahead, I have no doubt whatever took place last year, this year should be bigger, better and greater as long as that heartbeat is ticking and you can breathe the air.
100%.
So, what happened? Why did they cancel last time, Ralphie, from the track and switch it to the Sunshine Coast?
So they found at the 500 metre mark that could have been sabotage, except it was perfectly manicured sabotage.
Right.
So they're still looking for the people who might have did it, but I'm just saying that it sort of fit the pattern, and I don't know, but it sort of fit the pattern like they accidentally put weed killer where they should have put fertiliser.
Right, okay.
Because whoever the vandal was, he had very good equipment. So I don't know, but anyway, that's that. So that was moved last week. They had gallops yesterday. The jockeys, one thing we know with jockeys, they're not going to put their own safety at risk. So we can assume it'll be perfect conditions. They flew Liam O'Keefe up there, the winks of curators, and he's given it the thumbs up. So let's just assume the Gold Coast will race well. But we are going to also assume with 37 mil predicted tomorrow that we're going to have a wet track. So just typically, how does the Gold Coast play?
Right. Okay. So with the wet track, what time's the rain expected to start, Ralphie?
Well, I popped open YR and I saw the 37 mil. So what's it saying? It's just going to be consistent. They're not saying a big dump, but from overnight onwards.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, first of all, the Gold Coast. I was looking at it this morning in terms of the lane bias. Best place to be when it's in true typically is, first of all, lane-wise, 4 to 11 and that's a pretty, big width of lanes. In other words, that gives so many horses an opportunity. The more distinctive one is that on-pace leader packs, almost dominates half the meetings. So that's probably the part that's more important. Midfielders, it doesn't mean you can't do it, Ralphie. It's almost 28%. So I do expect that if you get in the right part of the track, depending on the speed of the race, you could still win from midfield. And the back markers, as crazy as it sounds, Ralphie, their chances are going to be heavily reliant upon not just so much just the race shape, but also ensuring that, like, getting on the fence and trying to save ground, unfortunately, won't help you in this situation if you're a back marker and if you come too wide, because what I noticed is it's a massive drop-off when your lane's 12 or wider. So it is pretty important. You've got to be in that sort of 7 or 8 lanes to have maximum opportunity, and you've probably got to do a bit of weaving.
Bit of ducking and weaving, and the best jockeys tend to do it. So we'll start with race 7, the 2-year-old feature. $3 million up for grabs. Vince, so far on the table, there hasn't been $3 million performances, because this time last year it was Storm Boy. It was nice and easy. He was clearly the fastest horse and he outran him. That's often the case, but this year it seems like a little bit of a crapshoot. To use a conceded term, not a derogatory term.
Yeah, well, First of all, the beauty is fantastic to be able to have a race like that. In terms of the structure of the race, anywhere between, what have we got, 1.5 below benchmark with Invincible Woman, who's in the market, and where I've set the cutoff line is unfortunately all the way down to Vain Girl, which is around 5.5 lengths below benchmark. So there's a bit of a gap. Now, in terms of some of the horses that have had a crack at this distance, they haven't shown much. It's really going to get back down to the horses that haven't started at this distance that are going to really be, they're the ones that are going to make the difference in my view. And I just thought, what a great place to start until you gave me that little, I didn't realise, Ralphy, that we're going to be potentially on a heavy. Damien Lane, I thought Invincible Woman looks like a good setup based on that performance at Caulfield, but now I'm not so sure.
Well, it was Caulfield Hillside,
Yep.
Caulfield Heath, right?
Yep.
Sandown Hillside, Caulfield Heath. Since had a barrier trial since, I've read up that no horse has won this second start in a race, but clearly as soon as they passed the post, the stable, I think it was Lucy Yeoman, said, we're going straight to the Magic Millions, we're going to have a trial. I always like that from a trainer's intent point of view. They had a plan and they're sticking to their plan. So that's a good sign. What did it do at Caulfield? Because really, that's got to be a good starting point, given even though it's sort of a newish track, we're able to compare to older horses on the day, and this one sort of stacked up quite well on the day.
I thought it did, Ralphy. A couple of things. Number one, on raw numbers, fourth best of the day. So just putting aside, from an historical point of view, track-wise, because there's not many performances there, but being top four for the day, and then on adjustments, still made it in the top 10. In my view, they're all very positive signs. Then you look at the setup of the race. I felt that they went at a good speed. I mean, this horse was travelling 2.1 lengths below benchmark through that first 300 metres. Did improve the pace between the 8 and the 4, made improvement about 1 3/4 lengths. And I always say that the last 400 and 200 are very important with horses having their first race start. When you're going at a pace like this, they tend to drop off a fair bit late. And what I mean by dropping off a fair bit, they battle to get near benchmark. And this horse has turned up with a plus 1.6 last 400. Overall, last 2, plus 1. But the horse wasn't stopping, Ralphie. It was strong all the way through. Another 100 metres has to be an advantage, surely. And just from a pace point of view, you'd like to feel that a horse like this, where it's drawn, I feel like being drawn in the middle, excellent. As long as you get a clean breakaway, you can be in the midfield, slightly more forward pack. Because when you're going at that sort of pace early, tactically, if they want to use a little bit more energy, they can. And Damien's very good for that, Ralphie. He's not going to be trying to search and go crazy and say, I have to be part of the leaders. He's going to probably sit off that first and second line and be in that midfield, more forward position. And if that happens, then he's set up beautifully. Regardless of how fast they might go, I can't see how this horse is going to be disadvantaged. But track condition, I don't know.
Well, I suppose with the Icarian Dream you've got next on your most advantage, this is on the early edition.
Yeah.
So it's I think it's the most experienced horse in the race. It's had 4 starts. It's the Marcamp, which we've always got to be careful of. And she is at a Rosehill second on wet ground and a Warwick Farm win on wet ground. Obviously not bog heavy, so that's a different kettle of fish. And it has had a start up here and it won at Eagle Farm. How does it line up?
Well, of course, you always said the magic words about the stable, right? So how do you know how this horse is going to be turning up? It's at his first prep, run number 5. On the scale, it's been trending, in my view, a lot closer to the last run. And at 1,200 metres, I understand running 5.5 lengths below the benchmark. This is on adjusted figures. The track was reasonably good, in my view, at Eagle Farm that day. On the raws, we've come up 3.7 below. I look at that last 400 metres, 2 lengths below benchmark. It did look like this horse's run had peaked about 200 from home and was pretty much tapering in the negative over the last 200 metres. There's a few things that could bring into play. Number one, first time 1200, Ralphie, that can happen. Number two, just that little bit of exertion between sort of the 800 metres all the way to the 400 metres can have an impact on the horse as well. The only thing I can say is, well, you're a winner at 1200 metres. And handling the ground-wise, well, I'm just looking here, 2.2. Maybe that could turn out to be a positive in terms of wet track indicator. It's possible that could be a positive. Yeah, I'm probably neutral on the horse more than anything, Ralphie.
So the horse who led that race in its Eagle Farm win was the Playwright, and it won on debut at Rosehill over 1,100 metres, and that was on slow ground. So how does the Playwright line up here? Because it's quite good odds.
Yeah.
And Blake gets Black Shin.
Well, I mean, the beauty of this is obviously the horse has gone out at a really good pace early, Ralphie, at Eagle Farm, and there it is. I mean, plus 1.9. That's a bit of a shift from the 1,100 metres. We're talking about almost it's got to be like 3.5 lengths, transitional shift in early speed. In the mid, it was virtually identical to the 1,100 metre run, and it was slightly stronger overall last 400 metres, probably giving you that clarity that the horse got good improvement out of the first up run to second up run. But in terms of the final scorecard at 1,200 metres, 7.4 below. And yeah, like there was a big difference. But at the same time, these horses can improve heaps, Ralphie, when you have that sort of effort early. I mean, that horse could come on 3-4 lengths from that run. And also may not in the ground.
Yeah, that can be the testing time.
Yeah.
So let's line up these two. There's 3 others in the market, so I can line up 2 of them together. Gallo Nero won last start, and the favourite for the race was Memo. I put Memo in Sizzlers from its Wyong run. It was phenomenal. You talked about closing speed. I was so impressed by it. Last start at Randwick, it badly over-raced. It got everything wrong. So that's outside of the data. The horse just wasn't right on the day. Now, it's a maiden going into a big race. Who cares? Can it be good enough on the day? One thing that I keep looking at, though, grand final trainer Peter Snowden and Karen McAvoy with it. So it wasn't there to win. Obviously, it was there to win, but this is the big grand final. It got it wrong at Randwick. If it gets it right and progresses from Wyong, is it a chance of winning?
Well, one of the big things is this. I mean, the speed the horse showed at Wyong over the last 400 metres, you get pretty excited. I mean, plus 6.2, you know that's strong, Ralphie. Even on the raw figures, plus 3.1, it was pretty much overall on that day. Again, I use that line when I'm looking at ranking profile. You know, can you make it in the top 10? Because they're all scored for that day as well. So you get that sort of optics on the horse saying, okay, if you were 35-40 on the day, then you sort of can have a bit more concern. But getting in the top 10 always is a sign that the horse has got some ability. Now, that run last start, though, very different setup in terms of speed. 8 lengths below benchmark early. The move in the mid-race. And this can tank horses out, Ralphie. When you have a big squeeze, even though you're not running with a lot of pressure, 7.3 lengths, it's over a second move between the 8 and the 4. It's going to take something out of you, Ralphie, right? And then the last 400 metres didn't show the same sort of boom that it did at Wyong off a much faster pace. But the reality was the horse really didn't lose any more momentum. Like 4 to 2.7 below, last 200, maintain that 0.7 below. Can't be a negative. The setup's very good, Ralphie. Potential is there. Now, it's drawn 1. I do feel this horse, well, is he going to get all the way back? I don't know if Keren's going to do that. He might want to use the barrier to his advantage, and his biggest key will be, can he sit in that midline? If he can sit in the midline, then he's got to look to get off the fence in the home straight, because I don't feel, even with this track and it's going to have a lot of give in it, I don't feel that staying on the fence is going to give you advantages. Yeah.
I think that could be at least race 7. The pattern will be obvious on the day.
Yep.
And, a rider like McAvoy tends to work it out. And then the final one is La Bella Boom. So you watched it last week and you thought, oh, this is going to be pretty serious. Now, it wasn't on the clock, but 7-day backup traditionally is a good thing, and then we'll get to a few through the card.
Yep.
7-day backup for a 2-year-old, though, sometimes can be a challenge. It was a slow ground and it was a dominant win, so it probably didn't take a lot out of it. And local trainer Tony Golan is we've really seen since we've been covering Queensland. You want to be very careful risking this stable.
But for sure, and this is obviously one of his main horses in terms of chances because he's got a few in this race. Yeah, well, when I look at the setup, firstly, it does come in behind the others, Ralphy.
Yep.
Doesn't matter how I look at it. I look at it from multiple lenses. Number one, how did you rank on the day? And you look at this horse's, just on the raw figures, and you see best ranking last start, 36 best of the day. Okay, well, that's a plus side compared to the previous 2 runs, 78 and 74. And then when you look at the adjustments, it wasn't able to hold that number in terms of your ranking. I mean, that last start on the Sunshine Coast, went from a 36 ranking down to a 46. And mind you, I didn't feel like it was too harsh, in terms of the penalty. But bottom line is you're still around that 5 lengths below or worse in terms of where you stand. You've had one opportunity at 1,200 metres, and so from the 3 runs, that's the worst run. But I'm not negative when I see that initially, Ralphie, and the reason is first time, second lifetime start, massive drop-off over the last 400. Horses can evolve and improve, and I felt that there was a lot of improvement run to run in terms of the way the horse closed. And I felt also for Doomben, first time at 1,200, going 1 length below benchmark is a fairly solid effort under the circumstances and didn't really detract between the 8 and the 4. Just, it was done over the last few hundred metres. Even though it won the race, small field, here we are. Can you find that 3 lengths, and will the wet ground be the difference? Well, I am using the wet track indicator as guide for me, Ralphie. 4.3 negative. It doesn't give me a lot of confidence. It just tells me that if it is slow to heavy, I'd be extremely cautious. If we're slow to the dead range, then you can be a bit more bullish.
All right, let's get to the 3-year-old. We'll obviously tighten that up for a final edition of Race Speed Profiles. For the 3-year-old, also $3 million up for grabs. Big field, I assume they're going to be flying along because they normally do in this type of race.
This is race 8, is it, Ralphie?
Yep, race 8.
Beautiful. Yeah, okay. Well, you're not wrong about that. There's plenty of targeting up front. There's a good group of horses that I feel that are all going to push themselves in a positive line in the forward speed. And what's really interesting is when they have, good solid pace, the challenge is this. Sometimes they can work against you in terms of, you use a lot of energy. You typically want to be 3, 6, possibly 8 lengths off a maximum, particularly if you're on the wetter ground. And if they overextend and they go really hard, and at the moment, the way I'm looking at it is I forecasted it around, well, firstly, I've got above benchmark, and sure, we're going to make an adjustment for a wet ground, but the raws are always the guide. The theme is set up. It's got to be somewhere between 1.5 and 3.5 in terms of early speed. If we overextend and we go 4 or 5 faster, relative to a heavy ground, this sometimes helps the on-pace runners, Ralphie, to be in a more advantageous situation. If they don't, then I feel that the second line runners, the stalkers, those ones that are just a little bit further ahead than the midfield, that third line, they all get big chances. Lanes are going to be important, though.
Yeah, and let's start with Bahina. You've got it on top. It's $10 odds. I mentioned I put Memo in Sizzlers from Wyong. I wouldn't do that meeting because obviously it had a couple of features. This was the other one, and I'm watching it going, dear me, is this got ability or what? And then your numbers came through and it said it's got ability. Lee and Sheree Curtis, the trainers. Lee Curtis had Private Steer. I don't know if you remember Private Steer.
Yeah,
was
I do.
A very good horse. I think it changed stables before it won the Stradbroke, but he had that horse as a young horse and said it's got comparisons to it. I was very interested to see it come out as most advantage on your early edition here. What did it do at Wyong? What can you give our customers that insight from that?
Well, it's like this, Ralphie. First of all, when you see this sort of setup of a young horse who's only had 4 lifetime starts, number one, on the IVR adjusted figures, it ended up with a plus 1.1. Best of the day. On the Raws, it was plus 10.6. Okay, we were on a quick track, but it was still best of the day. And then when you break it down and you look at the setup, 4.7 lengths below benchmark. It's not a super fast speed, but to then turn around and go 11.4 length mid-race squeeze, which is almost 2 seconds, like of high exertion. Usually, you're not going to have an 8.5 lengths above benchmark last 400. That usually doesn't happen. When you have a big move like that, what I've generally seen is they're half that. They're like 3, maybe 4, plus 4, last 400. And this horse is going plus 4, last 200. So I just sit back here and say, first of all, look at the fractional splits, Ralphie. It doesn't matter. Okay, the track's quick, but you've got to look at what the horse has done. 3.6 above, 8 to the 6. 3.16 to the 4. 4.5, 4 to the 2, plus 4 last 200 metres. That's all signs of an elite horse, Ralphie.
That's a very good sign. It's a very good sign.
So the only little thing that, like put a little dent in the bubble for me was when I went to the RM, it's come up 2.4 negative, right, on the RM.
So what's RM?
The race matrix, right?
Right, okay.
In terms of the strength leading in.
Yep.
So this is one of the challenges. Again, as you know, Ralphie, this is a relatively new tool. We haven't been using it for 10 years. This is like season number 2, right?
Yep.
So please forgive me if I, can't quite nail it. But what I look at is this. The margin between the first and the second horse, and this is the MPS margin, not the official margin.
Metres
right?
per second.
Yeah, metres per second. 0.4 gap between the first and the second horse. And then between the second and the third, there was another 0.5 gap. But I always like to go to the fourth horse. It's just the way I've been doing it. I'm just going to say forever, right? More than 30 years. The gap then, it's from the winner to that horse, it's 3.4. So you got to allow something that, even though at the moment I haven't, right? I've just gone on the trend in. You look at the trend into the race, with the exception of the winner, the one we're talking about, virtually every other runner's had 6 leading runs to that. So you get a good optics around like the structure, the strength, to get a feel for, okay, where's this class really sit? So at 2.4 below, that's the low point as far as I'm concerned. But because if I'd seen the first 4 horses all inside length, then I'd be a little bit more nervous that this is probably where it's going to trend. But the reality is there's a big gap to the third horse. Now, neither of those horses that have run second or third went on. That doesn't mean that that's no good. It just means where you are in your campaign and what impact it has. So I do sit here and say, okay, it's a slight blemish, 2.4, but I could probably allow 1 to 2 lengths of upside. And that's why in the end, Ralphie, I said to myself, I'm going to stick with the plus 1.1 because I feel this horse is a genuine above benchmark horse. Drawn 14, it's not a great barrier, but I love Tommy, Ralphie, in terms of these type of horses. He's brilliant. Yeah, he's sensational. All he's got to do is find a position through the first half.
Yep.
And if he can be in that slot, midfield is what I'm hoping, not right at the back of the field, right? Because if he's right at the back, he can't afford to do the big wide run, particularly
It's
if it
your
stays
elastic
full.
band theory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if he can be midfield, why not? Why couldn't he do that?
All right, so this is the horse with potential big upside. You're getting
Yep.
$10 on it. Yes, it's got to get the right lane. Yes, it's got to handle the
Yep.
wet, but that's got the big upside. So conversely, Snitson Over, it's probably found a level. Oh, I hate saying that with a Mar horse, but it's having its fifth run for its first prep. Won in Newcastle, then went to Caulfield. Ticks the box of winning on wet ground. It was very wet that day at Caulfield. 6 weeks between the runs. What type of setup is this?
Well, gee whiz, Ralphie. When you look at, well, that last run at Caulfield, yes, of course, the ground conditions. But in terms of what it done in its previous 2 runs, it was like it got the biggest blessings from all the planets. Because the maiden run on the Kenzo, early speed plus 1.4. The Newcastle run on the 16th of 11, early speed we're talking, the horse is travelling plus 2.4. Okay, of course, we're on a wet ground. Of course you're going to go much slower. Now, mind you, those prior 2 runs, all the way to the 400-metre mark, this horse is racing solid above benchmark. Here, we're going 12.9 below first split time. Really, very little transition between the 8 and the 4, 9.9 below. Hard finish under the circumstances to go 3.6 below. Like, that was where it made all its move, last 400. There's no way this horse was overextending in that ground condition. Plus side, you said it, Ralphie, it's got a WTI of 3.7, and I feel from what's happened in that particular race, there's no way this horse was remotely extending itself through the first half of the race. There would have been a lot more, and it's very prevalent in the last 400 metres in those fractional split times. So you look at the fractional split times, Ralphie, all the way to the 400, it's like a glue. 4.9 below, 5 below, then big shift to 1.3 below, and then a slight tapering to the negative. Even though it was 2.3, the negative was about 1 length. Very solid. So push that aside. Get a bit more insight on the Newcastle run. 0.9 below benchmark. I do like that, Ralphie. 0.9 below benchmark. Race matrix, 2.1 below. Early speed plus 2.4, in the mid plus 1.6. I look at the drop off. It's 0.7 below. Partial. Are we going to say, all right, can we allow anything for conditioning? Well, the intel's suggesting all 3 runs prior to the very last start, there's a bit of conditioning taper at the end. How much do we want to factor in through the aggressiveness of the pressure of the first 2 sections? But the reality is this horse can run very strongly up to a mile. I feel coming back to 1,400 metres is a big plus. And I would have been extremely bullish if this ground wasn't as wet, even though this horse can handle the wet, because I just know from patterns that when horses show this type of profile through the first 2/3 of the race, and they lightly raced horses come back in this camp 42 days, they're very dangerous.
While we're speaking about her, we should mention Bitter Creek. Now, he loomed and didn't quite put him away. He was Blinker's first time that day, back to 1,400 and Blake Shin on the wet ground, because and that's probably why I'm asking you, even though it's not in your early edition of Most Advantage, what type of case can be made for Bitter Creek on the wet ground who has seen it?
I had a good look at this horse, Ralphie. I felt it is 42 days as well, but it's a different setup.
Yep.
And now I don't want to turn around and say this is the difference between a Corstens Larkin stable versus a Mar. But no matter how you look at it, the setup is very, very different. And the evidence is there as well in terms of the intel. When you look at the structure of this horse, it's had the 5 runs this campaign. Yes, it's 42 days, but in that zone, we've seen the peaking profile come out. And the positive is this. It's a 1.52 lengths below benchmark at the 12 to 1,400 metre range. Yes, The horse definitely can also handle given the ground. Sure, it can definitely do that as well, but the reality is, in terms of where this horse is, even with a 42 days break, that early speed that you need is still not going to be the same, Ralphie. Because when this horse had to use a ton of early speed, and you've got to go back to June, Ralphie, where the horse went 1.3 above, then you look at the closing two splits. Now, there was a lot of give in that ground that day, because, I mean, the Raws came up 15.3, but you've seen, like, if the drop-off was monumental, plus 1.3 down to 8.3 below and 8.2 last 400 metres. Off that sort of pace. Now, even if you allow for the adjustments of the day, which you can go into the review sheet and have a look at where that blend, all right, you could allow a few lengths for that and say, okay, maybe this horse on adjustments could have been plus 3 or 4, but there was nothing in the middle or the late. So if you're dragged into a battle, this is going to show up here. And this horse has continuously lost early speed. Now they've got the 42 days off. They've got a brilliant rider on in Blake Shin. They're all the plus signs, Ralphie. You're drawn 15. Well, if they try and use tactical speed, I reckon they're going to be in trouble. If they go out the back, and this is the unfortunate part, what's Blake going to do? He might, well, it's a lot of money on the table. Maybe he's going to say, no, stuff it, I want to be in a positive position, and he's going to make that decision based on other races earlier in the day. But if he goes all the way back, he's going to get too far back. So that was the problem why I couldn't push him in to a sort of genuine top 4 berth.
All right, so a couple of quick ones here. Firstly, Cottagio led throughout at Flemington, showing genuine speed. Had to take the second line run at Caulfield on that mid-November day because that was savage headwind, and in the end it did it no favours. Had the 6 weeks between runs, showed good speed at Eagle Farm. Is he a chance of just rolling along and keeping going at big odds?
Yeah, well, so this is the thing why, I said right at the start, Ralphie, that depends on what happens through that first section.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, the setups can be very negative from pace runners, but number one, if that race shape is dynamically solid through the first half, which is a big possibility, right, then on paces and leaders can have an advantage. And then we look at the stable, right, and then have a look at the profile of this horse. You just run down on the platform, Ralphie, and you just look at the run for the campaign. Only one race below benchmark, and that was the one at Caulfield, right? This is first section. All other runs comfortably above benchmark. Mind you, look at that Flemington run at 1400, plus 3.7, Ralphie. Eagle Farm last start, plus 2.3. WTI-wise, beautiful. You know that this horse has got a genuine range. Well, if we're on slow ground or better, then we could end up, this horse's WTI sits rock solid in the 6 range. So you'd be beating your chest. But then if you look historically, and you go all the way back to Kembla Grange Maiden, where the track, Ralphie, you know and I know, 28 lengths below benchmark on the Raws. Of course it's heavy, right? WTI, 6.2. So you can feel very comfortable. This horse is going to love it. Just going to get back down to that first half of the race. If they run, I feel this horse is going to be holding. I felt that this, out of all the on-pace runners, because there's a group of them, I felt this was the best one of the on-pace runners.
Well, this is Cottagio at $26, yep. So certainly one to keep an eye on. And what you want to underline here is wet won't be a problem for this horse.
No, I'm very confident about that part. If they stack up, so this is the downside. Let's just say for whatever, maybe there's a bunch of scratchings and they stack up and they're not running with the same vigor. Because you've got to remember, Timmy Clark is only going to go as fast as he needs to go. Hopefully, if it's a full field, everybody wants to attack, then Tim Clark is going to make everybody suffer as well, right? And that's probably what you want. Yep. But if they sit up and they don't, and he only runs to the rhythm, then he will be a lot more vulnerable.
So we made the case that Bohema might have some big upside, but there's probably another. In fact, in case there's scratchings and gets into the field, I will ask you about a second one. But firstly, Dance to the Boom. Have we seen the bottom of this horse?
Number 13, yeah.
Actually, it's got some closing speed.
This is another one that's got a lot of talent. No question, a lot of talent. And when I was looking at the intel yesterday, I said to myself, "Oh, Bjorn Baker." Well, first of all, you know Bjorn, what he's like. he's super capable, Ralphie.
He's so good at targeting.
Yeah, and then look who's engaged.
D-Lane.
Right, that's not a coincidence in my view. That looks like a plan, right?
Yeah.
And then you look at his setup. You know when the horse is going 8.8 lengths below benchmark, I say blessing. Why? Previous run, 1.9 lengths below benchmark at Canterbury, first split time. 4.1 above, this is a Canterbury, between the 8 and the 4, plus 3.9, last 400. Okay, it's 1,200 metres. Sure. But what you're doing is you're getting a baseline insight, first of all, where Bjorn's got this horse, right? He's turned up in top condition, right? I would say battle ready already. Go second up, Wyong, gets a complete reversal in terms of race shape. In my view, probably a bonus, right? Gone from a 1.9 below to minus 8.8. So definitely from that perspective, I said, okay, that's a big advantage because if you felt that first up run, you're getting a pretty cruisy first section, right? Then you look at the mid, and this is what surprised me. It was an 8.4 length mid-race move, almost touching benchmark, but still much softer than the 400-metre section first up. And then how do you turn up and go 10.9 last 400? 10.9 last 400. Like, smashed it. So that indicates two things. Putting aside the track speed, Ralphie. Number one, when you're travelling at 8.8 lengths below benchmark and you see that close, this horse was absolutely jogging through the first half of the race to be able to do that and had the right time to warm up in terms of the setup of the race to be able to give everything late. And this is exactly what it's done. It's just powered. Even when I look at the lane positioning where it was, it didn't warrant that. Now, I make adjustments for the track speed, Ralphie. You can go ballistic. I still ended up with, couldn't be less than a +8 last 400. Now it's up to 1,400 metres. Is absolutely ready for this. So the challenge is this. Damien hasn't drawn pretty in 18, and he's going to have to make some decisions. Of course, the indicators are that no surprise if this horse is in the first half of the pack. No surprise if that happens. Now, the way I've scored it in terms of that first sectional move, I'm just sitting here saying you're going to be in the forward move because if he goes all the way back, even with a big booming close, you need luck, Ralphie, right?
Yeah.
But if he pushes himself in a forward momentum and then looks for a slot, second line, third line, and can slot in with cover, then look out.
And that's Damien Lane 101, isn't it? He goes forward, slots in, and wins lots of races.
Well, that's what Damien's all about. Now, of course, are they going to be happy because they see a weak track condition? I don't know if that's a good or bad thing for this horse because when you look at the run at Kembla Grange Maiden, that ground was wet, Ralphie, 15 lengths below on the Raws. They sort of really slowed in the middle that day, so you don't really get a proper insight. So the WTI of 0.6 below is probably slightly unfair. And if I turn around and say, okay, could the horse have smoothed out that midline run and improved its overall performance by 3 lengths? Well, it's easy for me to say that, right? But that would also improve the WTI dramatically. So that's really the only question mark with the horse.
All right, well, with these other races, we're going to pick up the pace. So
yeah, sure.
Because we're going in deep on these, I don't want to not say about Tuileries. If Tuileries number 18 gets a run, what's it shown capacity-wise?
Okay. Well, another lightly raced horse, of course, Ralphie. So here's the thing with this horse. When you look at the first up run in the maiden, going 2.5 lengths below benchmark. It's probably a good challenging speed for your first race start. Didn't have, in my view, like a big finish over the last 400. It was like 1.8 below. But there was a slowdown between the 4 and the 2. How much are you going to allow for that? So could the horse have gone benchmark late? Maybe, maybe not. But then when it went to Canterbury and it's travelling 6.5 lengths below benchmark on a good, quick track, the move in the mid-race of almost 10 lengths was a 9.2 length mid-race squeeze. 1.5 seconds, Ralphie. Bang, last 400 plus 7.2. Electric. Absolutely electric. With a little taper over the last 200 because I felt the horse peaked at the 200 metre mark and dropped off 1.2 lengths, but still went +3. They go up 50 metres, go to Randwick, no pace. Travelling 9.1 lengths below benchmark and really didn't do any work in the mid-race either, only improved the speed by 3 and left it all for a 400-metre dash. Now, there's only 6 horses in the field, Ralphie. What are you supposed to do? You just got to do what it takes to win, right? And It's gone plus 4.1. So, number one, of course, it's going to love the 1,400 metres. Ground conditions, well, I'm sitting here saying you're going to handle the ground condition, I reckon, because I look at the Randwick track line where it's sat, the WTI, okay, we're working more on a S5, G4 type range in my view, and you've got a 4.9 WTI, but you did no work. So I wouldn't be surprised if this horse handles the ground very well. Let's see if it runs.
Okay, race 9, the Magic Millions Cup. This one's only 2 million, 1,400 metres. It's a big field. You've settled on Charmstone on top. I suppose the starting point question is, Vince, now that we're almost certain to be dealing on wet ground and very testing conditions, the setup of 8 weeks between runs since that Caulfield run in traffic on that Savage headwind day after a very good run up the straight.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I've sort of come to realise more and more when we're talking about the Price Kent team is I've just been of the view that they've got their horses very forward, Ralphie.
Oh, they're good first up.
Yeah, and they're very fit. So this horse turned up first up off a super long break and was in sensational condition. That's not easy to do. Yeah. That time off, you still want a real run. And you look at what happened. It was 5.4 early below benchmark, so they probably got that part of the tactic right. Nice move in the middle, almost 5 lengths, then bang. This is the sign. Like, it's gone plus 5.2 last 400. That's the big signal, in my view, about if you didn't show that over the last 400 metres, you can sit back and say, okay, maybe there's a issue still with conditioning, or are we going to see the same horse or not from previous preparation? Because the break was long. Then it turned up, went to Flemington, where it ran third. I just thought we've got a complete reversible in pace. 1.1 above benchmark first section. That's over a second increase in pace from one run to the other, same distance, 21 days later. But here's the other part. The mid-race was just so much more intense. Like, it was 4.4 above, like a big ratchet up. Horse cops are slow between the 4 and the 2 of 2.8 lengths, and then almost runs benchmark last 200 metres. So you can see through the structure and the setup, not what you would call a beautiful balanced run in terms of energy distribution. And so the plus 1.3 for that run gives you a pretty clear signal. It could have been a lot stronger. In my view, definitely trending to that 2.5 from the previous campaign at Rosehill over 1,400 metres. And then last start, Caulfield 1,400. Pace early, 2.7 lengths below benchmark. In the mid, it went that sort of speed. No finish, though. Just like very, very disappointing in my view in terms of the finish, going 8.4 lengths below benchmark. Now, there's a few things you can look at. Why has that happened?
It jogged home in traffic. It was that inside barrier that day, which was just yuck.
Yeah, and this is no doubt one of the challenges. Now, they've had 56 days off. They know they've got a horse good enough for this race. Probably the thing that stands in its way now is the ground condition.
Yeah. So conversely, with ground condition, been a while since I said a horse dogged it. I reckon Moravia last week dogged it late, but blinkers go on. Tommy Berry goes back on, rock hard fit, and on a wet ground, I think that'll be the theme tomorrow, Vince. That you want these horses that are fit, and these older horses particularly. There's a reason why people have made so much money on quick backups.
Yeah, for sure. And that makes a lot of sense. So I guess the way the way I'm looking at it, this particular horse is he hasn't had many opportunities at 1400.
Yep.
He has been at 13. So what I like to look at, Ralph, is when I see that, okay, and saying, all right, you only had one crack at 14, and it was really early days, right? So you can't just sit there and say, and what I mean, this is in recent times, right? You can't sort of sit there and say, okay, is that bad or not? The overall performance that day at Rose Hill, it still was a plus 1.9. Even on adjusted race matrix wise, it was benchmark. So I'm not going to sit there and say this horse can't get that, but I'm going to use that as my yardstick to say, how does that match where you are now? What we've been seeing at 1,300 metres is if the horse can breathe through the first half of the race, it's generally like a big plus, but I don't believe you're going to be able to breathe here. I just feel intensity is going to be on from the start. Moravia is going to be in a very positive position, not leading, but up in the where you need to be.
Yep.
So therefore, can you turn up and run, let's say plus 1.5 under that scenario? You know the horse is rock hard fit. That's it. And can this trainer do it?
Yep.
Can Michael Friedman do it?
So it's right in the mix there. So
Yep.
a couple of odds. One, they are on your graph here. So Weigel Tiger, I can't believe it's big on the size of its price, because the horse that it ran second to, that's a real horse, Transatlantic. It's really going through the grades. Tony Golan's saying that's his Stradbroke horse. Look, the performance was terrific. Now it has to handle the lead pack, and it has to show that it can really handle wet ground. But it's been running very well.
Well, that's the big thing for this horse, right? Is that? But I mean, you look at the Ipswich run, it doesn't matter. I mean, the horse gone plus 8. So you know this horse can go very, very fast, Ralphie. Right?
Yeah.
And then you look at the last run at Eagle Farm, another indicator. Plus 3 first split time, plus 5.4 in the mid. So that means the horse had massive energy early, could have gone faster, but didn't, which is good, right? I'm not saying that it should have or shouldn't have. The reality is when you combine the two, you've got this horse travelling through the first 2/3 of the race, 8.5 lengths faster than the standard, and then we get a drop-off. The drop-off all took place realistically, where it really fell off was the last 200 metres. Entitled to do that. And what was really interesting for me, I mean, I know it was 23 days between runs, but usually that run at Ipswich probably should have taken more out of you, but just sort of tells me that this horse got a bit of grit.
Yeah.
And here we are, 1,400 metres, nowhere to hide, of course, and how we just the ground conditions, Ralphie. It's how you're going to look at this ground condition on could work in its favour. I reckon the horse might get through the ground because WTI sort of sits low twos, possibly in that 3 range. There is that run at Eagle Farm where we got a plus 5.2. Like if it could repeat that, but that's going to be governed by early speed.
All right, so Bounding's probably set for this. It won the 3-year-old last year and it won first up. It's got a sound set up, the little dip second up, which is so you can say it will run well. What probable forecast have you got for a Bounding tomorrow?
Well, firstly, I just thought the first up run was excellent.
Yeah,
I had a good look at that, Ralphie. Number 1, 1.6 above the first section, big dip in the middle, lost almost 3 lengths of momentum between the 8 and the 4. Finished off with a plus 1.7 last 400. On the Raws, it ranked second best of the day. On adjusted runners numbers, it was third best of the day. Race Matrix had it clearly above benchmark, even though on adjusteds overall, it was a 1.9 negative. All very positive signs. Goes to Eagle Farm 31 days later. Doesn't have to do the same work through the first section, going 2.2 lengths below benchmark, so almost 4 lengths softer. But nice move in the middle, Ralphie, plus 1, and then a plus 3.1 last 400 metres. I can't help but feel this horse is really needs this 1,400 metres now, and it's going to get that. And wet track-wise, it can handle give, Ralphie. I mean, if we wake up and the rain's torrential and we're on a real heavy ground, I don't know what to say to you, right? But if we're slow and we're not in that heavy range, because the track's been manicured to perfection, I don't expect the track to stay, super wet, right? Because we're in the summertime.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how you look at it. So then, if I look at it from that lens, if we're on a slow track, this horse is superb. Rock solid WTI in the 4 range. So the horse can handle some give in the ground. You just got to be nervous if the track's heavy.
All right. Well, that brings me to Chrysor. This is the best 20-1 shot I've seen for a while. For this reason, it first up run was on very heavy ground. It was sensational at Flemington. Now, then they just had throw at the stumps and the Epsom and the Golden Eagle. It's not up to that. They've given it the freshen up. So there's every chance it's going to turn up fresh. And if it turns up what it did at Flemington, it should not be $20.
Yeah, well,
it's like Shin, who rode it in the trial and did nothing on it. And I love seeing a good jockey when he rides it in a trial do nothing, because he's saying, I'm just testing you if you're my mount.
Yeah, well, I think he's got that right in terms of the mount. I really do. Number one, it's one of those Waller horses, Ralphie.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at that Flemington run on the way the ground condition was on the day, he had this horse wound up for that run to probably really see where are you at, right? What can we really get out of you? I didn't feel that the first section going 10.1 was ideal for the horse, but the move was massive in the middle, and even with a very minor taper over the last 200 metres, a 0.4 below, probably lost about half length. I just thought it was excellent. Now, when you look at the progressions through that, and this was first up 1,400, the one you're highlighting, that run. Yeah. And that's the run to highlight. Plus 1.9 race matrix, rock solid, +1. It's a top 3 performer. Doesn't matter how you look at it. WTI off the charts. So, this is the horse you land on. Well, it's going to handle all things.
Yeah, I like it. All right, we'll move on. And the last race here, I think there's a pretty skinny race here. So you've got Hidden Wealth, Sofrato, Boom Talk, Yellow Brick as the main ones. The market are similar. They're not saying there's a lot of depth to the race. So in summary, what's your feeling here with this race? Because we have to pick up the pace.
Yeah.
Paul's going to charge us overtime.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. I like it when Paul likes to charge overtime. That's good. It makes me happy. It means that we're doing our job. Well, so we're looking at Yellow Brick first and foremost.
Well, I think so. Yeah, it's got some class.
It does. It's got plenty of class. It absolutely has plenty of class. If you just look at this preparation that it just went through, ended up peaking with a +2.2 over 1,800 metres at Rosehill. The other thing that was very interesting with this horse is look at the tactical variation speed-wise. Anything from 2 lengths below benchmark to +10. Got a lot of capability in terms of tactics. Also distance range-wise, which is really interesting. So here's the question that I want to put out on the table. Revisiting the horse for myself is, this race is 1,300 metres. It is 63 days between runs. So the horse is first up, going to have freshness back in its legs. How are we going to deal with that? That's the big thing. Because right now, it is definitely best profile. In my view, at the moment, we're looking at, I would say, 1,1600 and above. Even though it didn't win the last 2 races in that range, but you've got to look at those setups. They're not normal. It's not normal to go to Rosehill on the 9th or 11th at 1,800 and here you are, you're +11. Yes, that distance range can give you a fast run race, but that's not a normal setup in the sense of how good or bad you can run 1,800. My view is, if it was more orderly, this horse could turn up and run a +3 or 4 at 1,800 metres, and we would say, okay, here's the gap. The gap between 18 and 13 is probably going to be 3 or 4 lengths. So that's the question. Can this horse turn up and run +2 or 3 at 13? That's the key.
Good trial since. The other horses there, so Sofrado, Hidden Wealth. Sorry, I just want to finish with Yellow Brick. It's wet track performances. 2 solid heavy track seconds. What type of wet track indicators brought up?
From a wet track point of view, again, if we're going to be on heavy,
Which I'm assuming.
yeah, then if you look at the profile of the horse, it's probably going to be slightly down in my view. I feel that even though the horse on official ground's been on heavy, but when I look at the raw figures to give me my guideline, I'll give you some example. If I go all the way back to 22, Gold Coast, this is how I use historical data. I mean, the raws are 18.4. The horse gets which is in my view, at that early stage of heavy track, it gets a 0.5 below WTI. Then if you go and look at that run prior to that at Ipswich, where the raws are plus 12.9, 6 lengths difference in terms of track speed, the horse gets a 6.2 WTI. So you know, if we're S7 or better, then this horse is going to absolutely thrive, because I'm sort of going down to the worst case scenario for this track in that sort of conditions. Now, if we look at a scenario where on a WTI, like let's say we look at the Toowoomba 28th to 9th, well, it initially come up heavy, but it wasn't Ralphy, right? I mean, the raws have come up plus 1.7. There's no way. So you can't use that as a guideline. And then if I look at the Sunshine Coast, 11th to the 5th, first up, they've marked that track heavy. But on the raws, it's 9.1. You know, we're firmly in an S5 type range, Ralphie. 6.6. This is why. I don't know, Ralphie. I'm a bit sceptical about how heavy will it really be.
Well, I'm looking at YR overnight. There could be 5 mil just in an hour.
Yeah. What a joke, eh?
So Sofrado is probably the best of the wet trackers amongst Hidden Wealth and Boom Talk?
Yep.
All right, so we'll that'll be in more detail in race speed profiles there. Let's go pick the eyes out of a couple of other races earlier in the program here. In the sixth race there, moderate confidence there in the sprint. How are you seeing race 6 with Hard to Say, Hedged and Zerastro?
This is a good race, Ralphie. This is a really, really good race. I like this race. Number one, I feel there's going to be reasonable speed no matter how I look at it. It's not a giant field. No surprise, I don't mind those things, right? Because usually you might have less problems, in terms of traffic. But pace-wise, the way I see it is, I have scored it above average. There is this chance we could go to an outer reach of a plus sort of 4.5, but I feel it's going to be a lot closer to plus 2, which is excellent, and it's going to help a whole group of horses in that race. The challenge is, where do we start? First of all, I really wanted to have a close look at, now, I mean, I might not be feeling the same way after you told me heavy, right? But Hard to Say was the initial runner that I was looking at very, very closely. Of course, no surprise, we've got the right man on board in terms of Blake Shin, but I just looked at the setup of this horse. He's a genuine, in my view, a genuine plus 1 horse when right. And you can go all the way back to Rose Hill back in February this year. There it is, 0.9 above on the IVR adjusters, race matrix indicating 0.8. I look at the setup of that race. They went 5.5 lengths virtually below benchmark early. That's what the horse was travelling at. 3.9 above in the 8 to the 4, plus 8 last 400. And then I look at where it was on the track, and it's, travelling last 3 splits, lane 4. Coming all the way forward this campaign, what I've been looking for is the horse trending to that. It's really interesting. That run at Doomben, I felt that was the run where we could have seen that, but it had the big slowdown in the middle. 2.4 above, I felt slightly overreaction through that first section. 1.5 below in the middle. I felt that was a real negative on the energy distribution of the horse, almost losing 4 lengths. Last 400 plus 1.6. But you see, this was a little bit of that fartlek run, Ralphie, like peaking between the 4 and the 2, going from 1.2 below to a 2.1, and then we've got a drop off. Like, that horse really felt that last 200 metres and lost almost 2.5 lengths of velocity. So I don't feel It was a smooth move of energy. And if I would have smoothed that out by about a length, this horse gets me around that half above. And then it goes to Eagle Farm 28 days later. Lovely. 1,000 metres, too short, Ralphie. But look what it does. +1 early, 0.4 above in the mid, +2 last 400. Very strong. That's what I want to see. And now we're at what I believe, golden distance and absolutely ready to throw down. I'm not going to say it's going to beat the 0.9, but I just feel you're going to run 0.9. So the track conditions are the next thing you have to look at now, which I wasn't looking at yesterday, to be candid with you, Ralphie. I wasn't sitting there thinking about these heavy tracks.
Yep.
And I don't know about that. It's a bit of a bummer.
And that becomes the theme of the day, unfortunately. So sort of it comes to fitness as well. But then, you got a horse like Samana, who was fantastic winning the 3-year-old last year. It's now at the sprint. First up, I would say that I would assume that they'll say, righto, this is grand final. We're coming to play first up. But limited exposure on wet ground, but one of them was a Group 1 second to Zugotcha, so that's seemingly pretty good form on face value. What type of wet track feel have you got for Zabana?
Well, we've got to go back a fair bit in time to really bring that to light. And that doesn't mean that when horses start off in their campaigns, I have seen many horses, Ralphie, they don't handle it that well, but as they progress, they get better at it.
Yep.
But if we go all the way back to 23 January, where I would say no question, heavy track -20, right? That's heavy. WTI -1.2. So you could sit there and say, but was it at the end of the campaign? Yeah. And so probably unfair judgment. Next time we see a heavy, is it really a heavy? When we go to Kembla Grange, officials come up heavy. The raw figures are saying 8.1 below. Well, that's not a heavy track, Ralphie. That's a slow 5. I can't even say it's a slow 6, right? Yes, WTI, bang, 7.7. So you've got to have the radar up because we're saying heavy, but what happens if it's a slow 7? If it's a slow 7, I'd be including.
Yeah.
If it's not, and we're on bottomless, do you really want to risk your money?
All right, so more of that clarity will be put in the final edition of Race Speed Profiles. The Mares race 5, you've got low to moderate. Miss Rumbini is the favourite, and rightfully so because it was fantastic in winning at Ballarat. Yep. Obviously, it's aimed to peak here, but we've got the usual challenge of the wet track now, but it's a very tight price for mine at $3 range. What's your summation?
Yes. I know. What's going on with these bookmakers, Ralphie?
I'd be staggered if it doesn't start significantly better odds tomorrow, given these conditions.
I'll look at it like this. First up run. Again, this is this little, my view, of course, through the prism of the numbers, about how the Price Kent team have their horses so forward.
Yeah. First
up, 1,200 metres Caulfield, 0.2 above. Race Matrix pretty much saying, yep, that's the grid, 0.3. No speed early, 8.3 lengths below benchmark. Not a big move in the middle. Still 6 lengths virtually. Going 2.8 below. Solid last 400 plus 3.1. I look at the close, Ralphie. Just look at those fractional splits. 2.3 below 8 to 6. 0.6 below 6 to the 4. 1.2 above 4 to 2. 1.9 above last 200 metres. All in one direction. Faster. And the horse, looks like it was screaming even for more ground. They go to Ballarat and look at this. And this is the thing for me, Ralphie, right? Like we're gone from 8.3 below to 0.1 above. Just like that. And the horse handled it beautifully. 1.5 above in the mid again, much faster. Last 400. This is the big telltale sign, right? Almost identical to the previous run, where there was like a second and a half slower. It's gone 2.3 above. Not far off what it did overall last 400. And then I look at the lens of the last 200 metres. Yes, you could look at this and say the horse has pretty much hit the peak somewhere just inside the 400 metre mark, and we're seeing a deterioration. I sit back and say, okay, I'm going to look at that and say, what does that mean up to the 1,400 metres? It's 1,300, not 1,400, because at 1,400, I don't like the horse as much, but at 1,300, I do. I just sit here and say, you've nailed it, because I reckon this is probably right now as far as you'd want to extend. And if you can breathe through the first section and just get some space and not have to use all the fuel, you're going to run a strong 13.
I want to ask about Revolutionary Mist before we push on, particularly given wet ground. Mark Zara back from holidays. No, he's got 2 rides tomorrow, 58.5. I reckon he won't be having a very big saddle, but it's a good sign that he's coming back for $1 million race for this horse. And he's got a terrific record on her, hasn't had things go away, and she does handle wet ground. What chance Revolutionary Miss?
Yeah, well, she handles wet ground. She also, in my view, has the preference for definitely above 1,200 in my view, even though the horse has performed well at 1,200 metres, like Caulfield first up. I thought that was a really good insight. Horse has gone half above. Race Matrix, has that like in that range, 0.1 above. I look at that run at Flemington, and this is probably, where we're right on the money. It's 0.2 above on the adjusted figures, but on the Race Matrix, you're saying it's solid +1. I look at the setup through the first section, 6.7 lengths below benchmark, slightly softer than what it did at Caulfield. Excellent in the mid-race, going 0.3 and above. Before, I felt like everything giving out last 200 metres, but on the rise. That last run, Eagle Farm, that's probably the big picture. I felt this was a true test. I mean, the horse has gone 0.3 below benchmark first split time, 0.3 above between the 8 and the 4, and then 0.9 last 400. Strong all the way through. 3.1 below. 1,300 metres is in my view, the minimum. It is the right stable, Ralphie, but what are you going to do with the wet ground?
Let's get to the staying race to finish off with. A big 1 hour and something pod. Mm-hmm. How come you've come up with Tannhauser on top? I know he handles the wet track, but he was awful last week.
Okay, well, I didn't put him on top because of the wet track, Ralphie.
No,
right?
But he does handle it.
Yeah, so I'm glad to see I've got a bonus there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'll just look at the setup of this horse, right? First of all, what are we dealing with? We're dealing with a race setup where you need to be around 2 lengths below benchmark to be competitive. I look at this horse, and what I was really wanting to zero in on, number one, of course, I feel you're coming from a good stable. But let's have a look at that run. And this is the run that I looked at. That Randwick run back in April, where it was 2,000 metres. And you look at, as it turns out...
Ground wet that day, Vince?
Oh, it was bottomless, right? And I can't believe it, like 22.7 lengths below benchmark. But the Raws was
tomorrow.
Yeah, so this horse isn't going to have any problems handling that wet ground. But I just look at the way the horse finished over the last 2 splits, and then looked at what it did 28 days later when they went to Queensland, 2,000 metres. 0.4 below benchmark overall performance. Again, not a lot of speed through that early split. That move in the mid-race, though, Ralph, like almost 17 lengths squeeze. That Doom run was actually 16, but the Randwick run was 16.7. And then I push all the way up, and then I look at what it did at 1,800 metres. But the one that captivated me was the run before at a mile. I just felt that this horse was, the Waller's got this right at its top. That run at Eagle Farm over a mile, again, no speed, 14.9 lengths below benchmark, but a massive mid-race move of 21 length squeeze, 6.1 above, last 400 plus 3.6. You have to be going superbly to pull that off, Ralphie. You just have to be. And then they go to Sunshine Coast. I think they were somewhat blessed. No speed early. Of course, the horse didn't run in the money. But again, I'm looking at it, 16.4 lengths below benchmark. Not quite the same move, but the signal was this. it was all about Mr. Waller and the big finish. Last 400 plus 7.1. Here we are, 2,200 metres, golden, and gets the handball of a wet track. Tommy's on board.
Yep.
Just it's got Waller written all over it, Ralphie.
It certainly has. I get it. So we'll tighten that up with race speed profiles, including the wet track information for the other runners there. The first three races are just first starters, maidens, and the country meeting. But we've extended this purposely, Vince. You're unable due to personal circumstances to do a update podcast tomorrow, but all the information will be there in the final edition of Race Speed Profiles.
Yes, unfortunately, I would have loved to be in mix of things tomorrow, but I can't.
Yep. So that's we as I said, we've extended the edition purposely. If there's any information that I need to put across, I will in a short podcast personally. But otherwise, all the information on wet tracks will be in the final edition of Race Speed Profiles. In the meantime, thanks so much for being a customer of Year Round Carnival Preview Edition of Magic Millions Day 2025.